Miss Theodora Bromley had survived precisely 43 minutes of the Duke of Claremont's Christmas ball before she decided to commit a small act of social treason. She was going to hide. It was not as if anyone would notice her absence. Aunt Agatha had been swallowed by a crowd of turbaned contemporaries within moments of their arrival, all of them cooing over each other's jewels and exchanging gossip with the enthusiasm of women who had outlived the need for discretion. The Dowager Duchess, their hostess's grandmother, and apparently Aunt Agatha's dearest friend, had swept her aunt away with promises of the most delicious scandal about Lady Pemberton, leaving Thea to fend for herself among the glittering masses. And glittering they were. Thea had never seen so many diamonds in her life. They dripped from earlobes and throats and wrists, catching the light of 1,000 beeswax candles until the ballroom seemed to shimmer like the surface of a sunlit lake. The women wore silks in every shade of winter: ice blue, silver, deep green, burgundy. The men were elegant in their dark evening clothes, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of people who had never once wondered if they belonged somewhere. Thea did not belong here. She knew it with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had spent her childhood in a drafty vicarage, learning Greek from her father and practicality from necessity. Her gown was perfectly respectable. Aunt Agatha had insisted on commissioning it, a deep blue velvet that Thea privately admitted was the loveliest thing she'd ever worn. But respectability was not the currency of ballrooms. Here, one needed the sort of easy, radiant confidence that came from a lifetime of wealth and consequence. Thea had opinions and a talent for saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment. These were not the same. She had already overheard 2 young ladies whispering about Lady Huxley's little companion with the sort of pitying contempt that made her fingers itch for something to throw. She had already been looked through by a baron who had asked her to dance before realizing she was nobody, then pretended to spot someone across the room and fled. She had already smiled so much her cheeks ached. Enough. The ballroom opened onto a long corridor, and Thea slipped through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of a woman who had learned that companions were meant to be neither seen nor heard. A footman stood at attention near the door, but he didn't spare her a glance as she passed. The corridor stretched before her, lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and decorated with garlands of greenery that scented the air with pine and cedar. Thea walked until the sounds of the ballroom faded to a distant murmur, and she found herself in a quieter wing of the house. Claremont Hall was enormous, obscenely so. Thea had grown up in a vicarage with 6 rooms. This single corridor probably contained more square footage than her childhood home. She tried 3 doors before she found what she was looking for: the library. 2 stories of books rose around her, accessible by a narrow gallery that circled the upper level. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth, casting warm light across leather chairs and reading tables. The smell of old paper and wood smoke wrapped around her like an embrace. Heaven, Thea thought. Absolute heaven. She closed the door behind her with a soft click and let out a breath. Here, finally, she could simply be. She was halfway to a bookshelf closest to the fireplace, already scanning the spines for something interesting, when a voice emerged from the shadows near the window. The ballroom is in the other direction. Thea jumped, her hand flying to her heart. Good Lord! A figure unfolded from a wingback chair she hadn't noticed, half hidden in the darkness beyond the fire's reach. A man. Tall, taller than she'd expected as he rose to his full height, with dark hair and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't arranged into an expression of such perfect, icy displeasure. I didn't realize anyone was here, Thea said, taking an instinctive step back toward the door. I apologize for the intrusion. And yet you're not leaving. It was not a question. Thea bristled at his tone, at the aristocratic boredom in it, the assumption that she would simply scurry away because he wished it. Neither are you, she pointed out. If you wanted the library to yourself, you might have locked the door. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, as if he were unused to being contradicted. The door doesn't have a lock, he said. Then I suppose we're both victims of architectural oversight. A pause. The fire crackled. Somewhere distant, the faint strains of a waltz drifted through the walls. You're hiding, the man said. It was not an accusation precisely, more an observation. I prefer to think of it as strategic retreat. Thea lifted her chin. And what about yourself? What's your excuse? I don't need an excuse. Men, she thought with some irritation, always had the option of simply disappearing. No one would miss them or whisper about their absence. Thea's gaze flicked over him again. The expensive tailoring, the loosened cravat, the way he'd arranged himself in the shadows. Some distant cousin, perhaps. Or a loose acquaintance, the sort who got dragged to these affairs out of obligation and suffered through them with as little grace as possible. How enviable, Thea said. I find that even a temporary disappearance requires a great deal of strategic timing. Does it? Oh yes, though not tonight. Fortunately, my aunt is currently ensconced with the Dowager Duchess dissecting someone named Lady Pemberton. I don't expect she'll remember I exist until the scandal has been thoroughly exhausted. The man's mouth did something strange. It twitched, almost as if, no, surely not. Men who looked like frozen marble did not smile. That may take some time, he said. Lady Pemberton ran off with her footman last Tuesday. Your aunt and the Dowager will be occupied for hours. Ran off with her, Thea gasped. Truly? Truly. They made it as far as Gretna Green before her husband caught up with them. Good Lord! Thea found herself moving toward the fire despite herself, drawn by warmth and the unexpected pleasure of interesting conversation. What happened? Lord Pemberton challenged the footman to a duel. No, the footman won. You're having me on. I am not. Another twitch of his mouth. Lord Pemberton is recovering at his estate. The footman has fled to the continent. Lady Pemberton has taken up residence with her sister and is, by all accounts, thoroughly unrepentant. A laugh escaped Thea. Perhaps I should have stayed with my aunt after all, though I suppose one has to wade through a great deal of nonsense to find a story like that. A high price for a small reward, the man said. The ballroom is not designed for entertainment. Thea tilted her head. Isn't it? All those musicians seem rather wasted then. The ballroom, the man said, is designed for display. For the careful cataloguing of who is speaking to whom and what it might mean for the marriage mart. He spoke with the weariness of someone who had endured a great many ballrooms. Entertainment is incidental at best. How bleak. Accurate. He had moved closer to the fire as well, she realized. Close enough now that she could see him properly. The sharp line of his jaw, the dark eyes that reflected the flames, the way his evening clothes fit him with the perfection of expert tailoring. He was handsome. Devastatingly so, in that cold, classical way, like a statue of some Greek god, all perfect proportions and no warmth whatsoever. He was also watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Curiosity, perhaps, as if she were a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. You have a startling lack of trepidation, he said. Thea met his gaze. I was under the impression that libraries were neutral territory. In theory, but no one comes to the library during parties. I do. Evidently. He paused. Why? Thea considered lying. She could give some polite fiction about needing air or seeking a moment's rest. But there was something about this man, this strange, cold, surprisingly witty man, that made her want to tell the truth. Because I don't belong out there, she said simply, and I've never seen the point in pretending otherwise. The fire crackled. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting past the darkened windows. No, the man said quietly. I don't imagine you have. Neither of them moved to leave. Thea knew she ought to go, ought to return to the ballroom and the noise and the endless, exhausting performance. But the fire was warm, and the silence was comfortable, and this eccentric man was looking at her as if she had said something interesting rather than something damning. Later, Thea would not be able to say exactly how it happened. One moment she had been a stranger in a strange library, trading barbs with a handsome recluse. The next, she was curled in the chair opposite his, shoes tucked beneath her, arguing about poetry. You cannot seriously prefer Wordsworth to Byron, she said. Wordsworth is all daffodils and gentle breezes. Byron has passion. Byron, the man returned, has melodrama. There's a difference. They had not exchanged names. It should have been the first order of business, but something about the peculiarity of their meeting had made the usual rules feel optional. He hadn't offered. She hadn't asked. And now it had gone on long enough to feel deliberate, a game they were both playing, seeing how far this odd anonymity could stretch before someone broke. "Melodrama is underrated," she said. "Melodrama is exhausting," he replied. He had relaxed incrementally over the past. How long had it been? An hour? More? And there was something almost approaching warmth in his voice now. All that tortured yearning, all those doomed loves and broken hearts. Does no one in Byron's world simply have a pleasant afternoon? Pleasant afternoons don't make for good poetry. They make for good living. Thea laughed. "Now you sound like my father. He was forever telling me that contentment was undervalued." "Was?" he asked. "He died 3 years ago." She said it simply, without the careful softening she usually employed. Consumption. "My mother followed 6 months later a fever, though I think it was really grief. The living went to a cousin. I went to Aunt Agatha. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I mean," she paused, trying to find the right words. "Be sorry that they're gone, because they were wonderful. But don't be sorry for me. Aunt Agatha is. She's marvellous, actually. Mad as a March hare and twice as entertaining. I'm luckier than most. Most companions don't speak of their employers that way. Most companions aren't nieces, and most employers aren't Aunt Agatha." Thea smiled. "She found me cataloguing my father's books 3 days after the funeral, trying to decide which ones I could bear to sell. She swept in, told me I was coming to live with her immediately, and informed me that I would be her companion in name only because she had no intention of being companioned at, but she needed an excuse to keep me, and this was the tidiest solution." She shrugged. "So here I am, professionally adjacent to an elderly woman who mostly wants me to read aloud to her and tell her when her turbans are crooked. And attend Christmas balls. That," Thea admitted, "is a newer development. She's the Duke's godmother, apparently. Couldn't possibly miss his party, and couldn't possibly travel alone in winter. And couldn't possibly leave me behind because, and I quote, 'You'll turn into a mushroom if I don't drag you into society occasionally, Theodora, and I won't have a mushroom for a niece.'" The man made a sound that might have been a laugh. Might have been. It was difficult to tell with someone so carefully controlled. "You don't seem pleased to be here," he observed. "I don't seem pleased to be in the ballroom," Thea corrected. "The library is perfectly lovely, and the company is—" She stopped, flushing slightly. "Unexpectedly tolerable." "High praise," he said dryly. Thea looked back at the fire. "The highest I'm willing to offer on short acquaintance." That almost smile again. Thea was becoming rather fixated on it, on the way his face transformed when he allowed even that small crack in his composure. He would be extraordinary if he actually smiled. Devastating. The sort of smile that ruined women. Not that she was the ruining type. Vicar's daughters learned early to keep their hearts sensible and their expectations modest. "I find myself curious," the man said, leaning back in his chair. "What did your aunt tell you about this party? About the Duke?" "The Duke?" Thea wrinkled her nose. "Not much. Only that he's her godson and she's terribly fond of him, despite, and again I quote, his regrettable tendency toward unnecessary grimness." "Unnecessary grimness," he echoed. "Her words, not mine," Thea said. "Though I've heard other things, of course. One can hardly exist in proximity to society without hearing about the Duke of Claremont." "And what have you heard?" "That they call him the Frost Duke," she replied. "Why?" It was ladies' gossip, things she had heard murmured in drawing rooms. Thea considered hedging, offering some polite nothing, but the warmth of the fire and the unexpected ease of conversation had loosened her tongue. "Probably because he never dances or laughs. They say he wasn't always this way, that he used to be charming, before his father and brother died, but grief transformed him into—" "Oh, how did Lady Bromwell phrase it? A man who has forgotten how to be merely human." She was warming to her subject now, comfortable in the way she was always comfortable when expressing opinions she had no business holding. Apparently every ambitious mama in London has thrown her daughter at him, and he's rejected them all with perfect icy politeness. No cruelty, mind you. That might at least be interesting. Just nothing. The man is apparently composed entirely of duty and disapproval. She shook her head. "Honestly, I feel rather sorry for whoever eventually marries him. Imagine being leg-shackled to someone with all the warmth of a garden statue in January. You'd spend your entire marriage trying to thaw him out and probably fail, and end up as frozen as he is. She glanced at her companion, expecting some response. Agreement, or at least acknowledgement. Instead, she found him utterly still. "I'm sorry," she said, suddenly uncertain. Do you know him well? I didn't mean to offend." "No," the man said, his voice strange. "Please, continue. I'm fascinated to hear more about the Duke's numerous deficiencies." "Too late." Thea registered the danger in his tone. She started. The library door swung open. "Daniel, darling," Aunt Agatha's voice rang out, bright and delighted. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere, and oh—" Her face lit up as she spotted Thea. "You've met my niece!" The world tilted. Thea's gaze snapped to the man in the chair opposite her. He had risen at Aunt Agatha's entrance, good breeding, automatic and bone deep, and in the fuller light from the hallway, she could see what the firelight had obscured. The quality of his coat was not merely good, but exceptional. The signet ring on his right hand bore a crest. His bearing was not merely aristocratic, but ducal, the unconscious authority of a man who had never been required to make himself small. Aunt Agatha's gaze moved from Thea's horrified expression to Daniel's carefully blank one, and her eyes lit with sudden comprehension and unholy delight. "Your Grace," she said sweetly, "may I formally present my companion and niece, Miss Theodora Bromley? Thea, dear, this is my godson, the Duke of Claremont." The silence stretched like a blade. The Duke, because of course he was, turned to face her fully. His expression had shuttered completely, all trace of that almost warmth extinguished as if it had never existed. He looked at her the way one might look at an insect that had wandered onto one's dinner plate. "Miss Bromley." His voice could have frozen the Thames. "A pleasure. Do go on. I believe you were describing my numerous deficiencies. Something about a statue in January, wasn't it? And the inadvisability of marrying me." Thea opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words emerged. For the first time in her 24 years of life, Miss Theodora Bromley, possessor of opinions on everything, capable of arguing with anyone, found herself completely, catastrophically speechless. Behind the Duke, Aunt Agatha's face was a study in poorly suppressed glee. "I can explain," Thea said. This was a lie. She could not explain. There was no explanation in the world that could adequately address the fact that she had just compared the Duke of Claremont, to his face, to a garden statue in January, and found him wanting. "By all means." The Duke's voice was exquisitely polite and absolutely lethal. "Daniel," Aunt Agatha said, in the tone of someone thoroughly enjoying themselves, "don't be cruel. The poor girl is mortified." "Is she? I confess I can't tell. Her face has gone a rather alarming shade of red. Is that mortification, or merely the fire?" "It's mortification," Thea managed. "I assure you." "How reassuring." "Daniel," Aunt Agatha said again, more sharply this time. Something flickered in the Duke's expression. He drew a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its razor edge, though not its chill. "Miss Bromley, I accept that you were not aware of my identity when you offered your assessment. I trust you'll understand if I find myself disinclined to continue our acquaintance." He delivered a bow so correct it was practically an insult, and turned toward the door. "Wait," Thea heard herself say. The Duke paused, did not turn around. "Wait," she said again. "I owe you an apology." "You do. And I'm giving you one. I'm sorry, truly." She swallowed. "I was repeating gossip I'd heard, which was unfair. I don't know you. I shouldn't have spoken as if I did." Slowly, the Duke turned. His expression remained unreadable, but he was listening. That was something. "However," Thea continued, because she had never in her life been able to leave well enough alone, "I will note that if you don't wish to be compared to a garden statue, you might consider not glaring at everyone as if they've personally offended you by existing." Aunt Agatha made a sound that might have been a gasp, or might have been a laugh. Thea couldn't tell. She was too busy watching the Duke's face cycle through what appeared to be several stages of disbelief. I beg your pardon. You asked why people call you the Frost Duke, Thea said. That's why. You're doing it right now, actually, that look, as if I'm something unpleasant you've stepped in. It's very effective at conveying disdain, less effective at making people want to know you. I don't want people to want to know me, he said. Then why are you upset that they don't? The question hung in the air between them. The Duke stared at her as if she had suddenly begun speaking in tongues. I'm not upset, he said finally. You're not? I am accustomed. There's a difference. Is there? Thea tilted her head, studying him. You're accustomed to being misunderstood, to being reduced to a title and a face that gives nothing away. And you've decided that if that's how the world sees you, you might as well be what they expect. The Duke's jaw tightened. You presume a great deal, Miss Bromley. I told you. I have opinions. You have presumptions. They are not the same. Perhaps not, Thea lifted her chin, but I know what I saw, and I know— She stopped, suddenly aware of how far she'd gone. I know I've overstepped terribly, and I'm sorry. Again. I'll leave you to your library. She moved toward Aunt Agatha, who was watching the proceedings with an expression of frank delight. Miss Bromley, he called out. She paused, then turned around. The Duke now looked. Thea couldn't quite identify the expression. Confused, unsettled. As if someone had rearranged his furniture while he wasn't looking and he couldn't quite find his footing. You argue your points effectively, he said. Even the wrong ones. It was not a compliment precisely, but it was not an insult either. Thank you, Thea said. I think. Don't thank me yet. You still owe me a dance. Thea blinked. What? A dance. The Duke's expression remained perfectly composed, but there was something in his eyes now, something that might almost be called mischief, if such a word could be applied to a man made of marble. It's customary, at balls. I'm told the musicians are wasted otherwise. Your Grace, Thea managed. I'm not certain that's wise. Undoubtedly not. But I find myself curious to see what other opinions you might share when given the opportunity. Consider it penance. Penance? For comparing me to garden statuary? His mouth twitched. Did you think I'd forgotten that part? Thea had, in fact, desperately hoped he'd forgotten that part. I was speaking metaphorically. You were speaking rudely. There's a difference. She stopped, took a breath. Fine, one dance, but I should warn you I'm not very good. I am. It will balance out. He offered his arm. Thea stared at it as if it might bite her. Behind her, Aunt Agatha cleared her throat. Well, don't just stand there, Theodora. The man asked you to dance. It would be rude to refuse. I believe, Thea said faintly, that we've established I have no particular gift for avoiding rudeness. But she took his arm anyway. The ballroom, when they entered it, fell silent. Not literally, of course. The music continued. The conversations carried on. The champagne flowed freely from silver trays. But there was a ripple, a wave of awareness that swept through the glittering crowd as the Duke of Claremont appeared at the entrance with an unknown woman on his arm. Thea felt it like a physical weight, a crowd full of eyes, turning toward her, assessing, cataloguing, judging. Breathe, the Duke murmured, so low only she could hear. They're just people. They're vultures in silk. His mouth twitched. That too. He led her onto the dance floor with the ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and before she could properly panic, his hand was at her waist and they were moving. I told you I wasn't very good at this, Thea said through gritted teeth, concentrating furiously on not treading on his feet. You're adequate. High praise from a man I compared to a garden statue, the highest I'm willing to offer on short acquaintance. She glanced up sharply. He was quoting her again. And there it was, that almost smile, hovering at the corner of his mouth like a secret. You're enjoying this, she accused. I'm enjoying watching you try to navigate a social situation without insulting anyone. It appears to be a novel experience for you. I'll have you know I'm perfectly capable of social navigation. I simply choose not to. An interesting distinction. An accurate one. She missed a step, he corrected smoothly, leading her back into the rhythm as if nothing had happened. I spent 3 years in London before my father died. attended all the proper events, made all the proper conversation. It was exhausting and pointless, and I hated every moment of it. And yet, here you are. Here I am, she agreed, being stared at by half the ton because the Duke of Claremont deigned to dance with me. They'll be talking about this for weeks. Months, probably. You're not helping, Thea said. I wasn't trying to. But his hand tightened slightly at her waist, a steadying pressure, oddly reassuring. They can talk all they like. It makes no difference to me. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll be speculating about. Who is she? Where did she come from? What could he possibly see in her? The Duke was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was strange, careful, as if he were picking his way through unfamiliar territory. What I see, he said slowly, is someone who speaks to me as if I'm a person rather than a position. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Thea's heart did something inconvenient. Your Grace. Daniel, he said. I beg your pardon. My name. It's Daniel. His dark eyes held hers. You've already insulted me more thoroughly than anyone has in years. I think we're past formalities. That seems... Thea swallowed. That seems unwise. Probably, but I find I'm tired of wisdom tonight. The waltz swept them through a turn, and for a moment they were closer than propriety strictly allowed. Tell me something else, Miss Bromley. Something true. She scrambled for something, anything, that wasn't the alarming flutter in her chest. Right. Right? She nodded. An advice column, anonymously. Letters from a lady of practical wisdom, in the Ladies' Monthly Register. Only Aunt Agatha knows. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I started it after my father died. I needed the money, and a purpose, a way to be useful. Daniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. You're the lady of practical wisdom, he said. You've heard of it? My grandmother reads it religiously. She quotes it at me regularly. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. You wrote the one about reformed rakes. Thea felt heat climb her cheeks. I wrote several about reformed rakes. They're a popular topic. The one that advised women not to marry them on the assumption that they've reformed, because, how did you phrase it? A rake's reformation typically lasts only until the next pretty face catches his eye, at which point the reform reveals itself to have been purely theoretical. I stand by that advice, Thea said defensively. My grandmother sent that column to 3 different mothers whose daughters she disapproved of. Are you... Thea stared at him. Are you a reformed rake? No. His mouth curved, an actual smile, small but genuine. But grandmother finds it useful to let people wonder. The waltz was slowing, the final strains of music swelled around them, and Thea became suddenly, acutely aware that this dance was ending, that they would have to part, that she would return to her corner and he would return to his duties, and this strange, impossible hour would become nothing but a memory. Thank you, she said quietly, for the dance, for not throwing me out after what I said. Thank me after the evening's over. There's still ample time for me to change my mind. Is that likely? No. He released her waist, stepped back into the proper distance between a duke and a nobody, but his eyes remained on her face. No, Miss Bromley, I don't think it is. The Dowager Duchess was waiting at the edge of the ballroom. She was a small woman, bird-boned and silver-haired, but her presence seemed to fill far more space than her physical form suggested. She dressed in black silk and diamonds, and her eyes were the same dark shade as her grandson's. Daniel, she said as they approached. You danced. I did. You never dance. I'm aware. Those sharp eyes turned to Thea, assessing her with the thoroughness of a jeweller examining a stone. You must be Agatha's niece, the one who told my grandson he was cold. Thea's stomach dropped. Your Grace, Don't apologize. The Dowager's mouth curved into a smile. He needed to hear it. He's been insufferable for years. She turned back to Daniel. I like her. Grandmother. One dance isn't enough. Take her to the portrait gallery. Show her the collection. Make yourself useful. I have guests, he protested. You have me, and I'll handle them. Go. The dowager made a shooing motion with one ring-laden hand. "You've spent 5 years hiding in corners at your own parties. Consider this my Christmas gift to myself." Daniel looked, for a moment, as if he wanted to argue. Then, almost resignedly, he offered his arm. "Miss Bromley, it appears I'm to show you the portrait gallery." "Is that an order or an invitation?" Thea asked. "With my grandmother, there's rarely a difference." Thea hesitated. Propriety demanded she refuse. Spending more time alone with the Duke would only fuel the gossip, already spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. But propriety had never been her strong suit, and the dowager was watching with an expression that suggested refusal would not go unremarked. "Lead on," she said. She took his arm. Behind them, the dowager turned to find Agatha already at her elbow, both women wearing identical expressions of satisfied cunning. "That went well," Agatha said. "Better than expected. She actually made him smile, Agatha. I saw it." "I told you she would. My niece is entirely incapable of polite deception. It's her greatest flaw and her finest quality." The dowager hummed in agreement. "The snow is getting heavier." "Is it? How inconvenient. We may have to stay the night." "Several nights, perhaps, if the roads become impassable." "What a terrible hardship." Agatha's eyes twinkled. "However shall we manage?" The two women exchanged a look of perfect understanding, then turned as one to watch their respective charges disappear into the portrait gallery. £5 says he proposes by 12th night, Agatha said. 10 says he does it sooner. Done. The portrait gallery ran the length of the east wing, a long corridor of gilt frames. Candles flickered in sconces along the walls, casting dancing shadows across 3 centuries of Claremont ancestors. "The official tour," Daniel said as they entered, "takes approximately 45 minutes and includes extensive commentary on artistic techniques and historical significance." "And the unofficial tour?" "Takes as long as we like and includes whatever commentary I feel like making." He gestured to the first portrait, a stern-faced man in an elaborate ruff. The first Duke. Earned the title by lending Henry VIII a considerable sum and having the good sense not to ask for it back. "A sound financial strategy," Thea commented. "The foundation of most great fortunes, I'm told." They moved on. His son, the second Duke, notorious gambler, lost half the estate, won it back, lost it again, then married an heiress and pretended the whole thing never happened. A family tradition? Fortunately, no. The third Duke was boringly responsible. Rebuilt everything, established the tenant system, planted the oak grove you can see from the library windows. Daniel paused before a portrait of a woman in pearl-studded silk. His wife. She's the one who started the Christmas party tradition 212 years ago. Thea studied the painted face, kind eyes, a hint of humour in the curve of the mouth. She looks like someone who enjoyed a good party. By all accounts, she did. The journals mentioned dancing until dawn, wassail bowls the size of bathtubs, and a Yule log so large it took 6 men to carry it. Something softened in Daniel's voice. "My mother used to read those journals every December, planning, making sure everything was exactly as it had been for 2 centuries. "Your mother?" Thea asked carefully. "She died when I was 12. He said it simply, but she could hear an undercurrent of pain beneath his light tone. "My father never quite recovered. He kept the tradition going for her sake, but the joy went out of it for him. It used to go the full 12 days, but he cut it down to 2. Easier to endure," he said. They walked in silence for a moment, past more portraits. The weight of history pressed down around them, all those watching eyes, all those expectations. "Is that why you hide during your own parties?" Thea asked quietly. "Because of her?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. They had reached a gap in the portraits, a space on the wall that was conspicuously empty, the wallpaper slightly darker, where a frame had once hung. "That," he said, "is where my father's portrait used to be, and my brother's. I had them moved to the private apartments after the accident." "The carriage accident. I heard that they—" Thea stopped. "I'm sorry. That's gossip." 5 years ago this January." Daniel's voice was steady, but his jaw had tightened. Thea knew the rest. Everyone did. The Duke and his heir had been travelling back from London when a wheel broke on an icy road. The carriage had gone into a ravine. Thea's chest ached. She thought of her own father, wasting slowly in his bed, time enough to say goodbye even if goodbye was never enough. At least she'd had that. At least she'd held his hand at the end. There was no warning, Daniel continued, still staring at the empty space on the wall. One day, I was the second son, the spare, as they say, spending my time thinking I had my whole life to become whatever I wanted to be. The next day, I was Claremont. Everything I was, everything I might have been, simply stopped mattering. That's not true, Thea said quietly. Isn't it? He turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something raw beneath the marble. A duke is not a person, Miss Bromley. A duke is a legacy. The man who holds the title is irrelevant. He exists only to steward the name until the next generation takes over. That's a bleak philosophy, she said. It's a realistic one. It's a prison, Thea spoke before she could think better of it. You've locked yourself inside a title and thrown away the key, and everyone around you, your grandmother, your godmother, probably half the people in that ballroom, can see you suffocating, but they don't know how to help because you won't let them close enough to try. Daniel's expression flickered. You presume, he began. A great deal, yes, she held his gaze. You've mentioned, but I'm right, aren't I? You weren't always like this. The man I met in the library, the one who argued about poetry and knew all the gossip, he's still in there. You just won't let him out. You've known me for 2 hours, Daniel pointed out. Long enough to diagnose my entire character. To see what you're doing, and it's not, she faltered, reaching for words that might actually reach him. It's not honouring them, your father, your brother. Whoever they were, I doubt they wanted this for you. This careful, controlled emptiness. You didn't know them, he said flatly. I know grief. Thea's voice softened. I know what it is to lose the people who made you who you are, and I know the temptation to simply go through the motions and tell yourself that's enough. But it isn't. It's just a slower way of dying. The candles flickered. Somewhere distant, the orchestra played on, bright notes filtering through the corridor like light through water. They stood in the shadows of 3 centuries of Claremonts, and the present Duke looked at her as if she had reached into his chest and wrapped her hand around his heart. My brother, he said finally, was called Edward. He was 10 years older than me. When I was a boy, I thought he was the finest person in the world, strong and kind and so certain of himself. He knew exactly who he was supposed to be. He was born to be the Duke, and he would have been extraordinary at it. And your father? Serious, devoted, Daniel's mouth twisted. He would be appalled at what I've become, hiding in libraries, refusing to dance, making a mockery of everything he taught me about duty. I doubt that, Thea said. She reached out, almost without meaning to, but brought her hand back down just as quickly. Parents want their children to be happy. Even the most duty-bound parent wants that, underneath it all. Whatever else your father expected of you, I refuse to believe he wanted you to be miserable. Daniel stared at her hand, now still by her side. You're very certain, he said, for someone who admits to knowing nothing about him. I'm certain about human nature. It's one of my professional qualifications. That surprised a laugh out of him, a real one, short and rusty with disuse, but genuine, the lady of practical wisdom. Thea dropped a slightly mocking curtsy. Advice for all occasions, including unsolicited opinions on aristocratic grief. Is there a column for that? Not yet, though I'm beginning to think there should be. Daniel shook his head, but he was still half smiling, and some of the tension had eased from his shoulders. You're an extraordinary woman, Miss Bromley. Extraordinary is not the word most people use. Most people are idiots. On that, Your Grace, we can agree. They stood there for a moment, in the candle-lit corridor. Come, Daniel said finally, offering his arm again. There's one more portrait I'd like to show you. At the end of the gallery. The portrait was smaller than the others, tucked into an alcove at the far end of the corridor. It showed 2 boys, one perhaps 15, dark-haired and serious, the other no more than 5, laughing giddily. "Edward and me," Daniel said, "painted the summer before my mother died. My father commissioned it as a gift for her." The older boy, Edward, had one hand on his younger brother's shoulder. The younger boy was looking up at him with naked adoration, a gap-toothed smile splitting his face. "You were adorable," Thea said. "I was missing 3 teeth and had scraped knees under that velvet suit. The painter nearly had a fit trying to make me sit still." "And Edward?" "Edward bribed me with sweets, an entire bag of sugared almonds, delivered after the final sitting." Daniel's voice was fond and sad. "He always knew how to manage me." Thea studied the painting, the way the younger Daniel leaned toward his brother, the protective angle of Edward's stance. 2 boys who had no idea what the future held, 2 boys who thought they had forever. "Thank you," she said quietly. Daniel glanced at her. "For what?" "For showing me this. For," she gestured vaguely at the gallery, at the empty space on the wall, at everything they'd discussed. "For trusting me with it. You didn't have to." "No," Daniel agreed. "I didn't." He was looking at her in that way again, the way he'd looked at her after the waltz, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. But there was something else in his expression now, something warmer. "We should return to the ballroom," he said, though he made no move to go. "We should," she agreed. Neither of them moved. "Miss Bromley." "Thea." The word escaped before she could stop it. "If you're Daniel, I should be Thea. It's only fair." "Thea," he said it slowly, as if tasting the syllables. "A nickname?" "Short for Theodora. My father chose it. He was fond of Byzantine history." She shrugged. "I've always preferred Thea." "Theodora sounds like someone who attends a great many committee meetings." Daniel's mouth quirked. "And Thea sounds like someone who insults dukes and hides in libraries." Somewhere beyond the gallery, a clock chimed. The ballroom waited, with all its glitter and expectation. Neither of them moved toward it. "I should," Thea started. "There's an orangery," Daniel said, at the same moment. He stopped. "Forgive me, you were saying—" She found herself curious despite herself. "Nothing of consequence." "An orangery?" "My grandmother's. It's through here." He gestured vaguely toward a door at the end of the corridor. "I find myself disinclined to return to the festivities just yet. If you wanted to continue avoiding society, it's as good a place as any." It was not quite an invitation, more an observation, a door left open that she could walk through or not. Thea walked through. He led her down a narrow staircase, and they emerged into a glass-walled structure that took her breath away. The orangery. She had read about such places, the elaborate greenhouses built by wealthy families to grow citrus fruits and exotic plants through the English winter. But reading had not prepared her for the reality, the humid warmth that wrapped around her, the impossible green of leaves and vines in December, the sweet scent of orange blossoms perfuming the air. "My grandmother's domain," Daniel said, watching her reaction with evident satisfaction. "She's been cultivating this collection for 40 years. It's magical. How is it so warm?" Thea drifted toward a potted lemon tree, its branches heavy with fruit. "Hypocaust system, Roman engineering, updated for modern sensibilities. Heated water runs through pipes beneath the floor." He gestured to the glass walls, now dark with night. "In summer, the panels open to let in air. In winter, they trap heat from the sun, and the hypocaust does the rest." "Your grandmother is a genius." "She would agree with you entirely." Daniel moved to stand beside her, and for a moment they simply stood in companionable silence, surrounded by impossible summer. Through the glass walls, Thea could see the snow falling more heavily now, thick white flakes swirling past the windows, beginning to accumulate on the lawns beyond. Inside the orangery, a fire crackled in a small hearth, and the air was soft with warmth and the scent of growing things. "It's getting worse," she said, nodding toward the snow. "It is." Daniel didn't sound concerned. "The head groom mentioned this morning that a storm was coming. By tomorrow, the roads will likely be impassable." "Aunt Agatha will be pleased. She hates travelling in winter," Thea commented. "Then perhaps she'll be less annoyed about being trapped here for several days." "Trapped?" Thea turned to look at him. "Surely it can't be that serious." "Derbyshire winters are not to be underestimated," he said matter-of-factly. A storm like this could easily close the roads for a week or more. I hope you brought sufficient wardrobe for an extended stay. Thea looked out at the falling snow. I brought exactly what I thought I'd need for 2 nights at a house party. Aunt Agatha will be fine. She always overpacks dramatically. I, however, may be wearing the same dress for several days running. I'm sure something can be arranged. My grandmother has an extensive collection, and you're of a height with her younger self. He said it casually, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Your grandmother would lend me her clothes, Thea said in disbelief. My grandmother, Daniel said dryly, would dress you in ermine and diamonds if she thought it would further her schemes. She's been trying to marry me off for 5 years. The fact that you've survived an entire evening without boring me to tears has almost certainly elevated you to the status of primary candidate. Thea's cheeks warmed. I'm hardly candidate material for a duchess. Why not? I'm a companion. The words hung between them. Thea found herself suddenly aware of how close they were standing, close enough to see the firelight reflected in his dark eyes. A door banged open somewhere in the house, followed by raised voices and hurrying footsteps. The spell shattered. Daniel stepped back, his expression becoming more guarded. We should return, he said. That sounds like something requiring ducal attention. It was, in fact, a chimney fire in the green drawing room, quickly contained, nothing damaged, but a rather ugly pastoral painting that no one seemed sorry to lose. But by the time Daniel had dealt with the servants and reassured the more anxious guests, supper was being announced, and Thea found herself swept back into the glittering crush of the party. She did not sit near Daniel at supper. Protocol forbade it. He was at the head of the table, flanked by a countess and a baronet's wife, while Thea was relegated to a distant corner with other companions and poor relations. But she caught him looking at her more than once across the candlelit expanse of white linen and silver, and each time their eyes met, she felt something flutter beneath her ribs. Dangerous, she told herself firmly. This is dangerous and foolish and can only end badly. But she couldn't quite make herself believe it. The evening marched toward midnight. By 11 o'clock, the snow had become impossible to ignore. It fell in thick curtains beyond the windows, piling on sills and drifting against doors, transforming the manicured grounds into a blank white wilderness. Footmen had been dispatched to check on the horses. They returned with reports of accumulation already knee-deep and showing no signs of slowing. Well, the Dowager Duchess announced to the assembled company, not sounding remotely sorry, it appears we shall all be staying rather longer than anticipated. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some seemed delighted. A week's unexpected holiday at one of the finest houses in England was hardly a hardship. Others looked calculating, their eyes darting toward the Duke, and then toward their own unmarried daughters. A few appeared genuinely distressed, mentioning obligations and appointments, and the impossibility of sending word. The staff will ensure everyone is comfortable, Daniel said, his voice cutting through the chatter with easy authority. Additional rooms will be prepared, and we have provisions enough to withstand a siege considerably longer than any winter storm. The Claremont larders are legendary, Aunt Agatha added cheerfully from her seat beside the Dowager. I remember the winter of '89, when we were snowed in for nearly 3 weeks. We ate better than we ever had in London. 3 weeks? Someone said faintly. This storm won't last nearly that long, the Dowager said, waving a dismissive hand. A week, perhaps. Consider it an unexpected gift. More time to enjoy the holiday festivities. Her eyes brightened with sudden purpose. In fact, she said, voice carrying across the room with renewed authority, if we're to be trapped here together, we might as well make the best of it. I propose we revive the old traditions, properly. She looked at her grandson with a gentleness in her expression. What say you, Your Grace? For a moment, Daniel stood very still. Then, slowly, he nodded. As you wish, grandmother. The staff will make the arrangements. The next order for the night was apparently the lighting of the Yule log. Everyone was ushered to the great hall, a medieval remnant with soaring stone walls, hammer-beam ceiling, an enormous hearth that could have housed a small cottage. The Yule log itself was a massive oak trunk, decorated with greenery and ribbon, waiting to be lit as the clock struck midnight. It was tradition, Daniel had explained during their walk through the portrait gallery. The Yule log was meant to burn from midnight on Christmas Eve until Twelfth Night, though in recent years, with the celebrations reduced to only 2 nights, the servants kept it going in his absence, ensuring the chain remained unbroken. "We gather here each year," the Dowager announced to the assembled guests, "to kindle the light that will carry us through the darkest days of winter. The fire that burned in this hearth has burned since 1603, passed from log to log, year to year. Tonight we continue that tradition." She nodded to Daniel, who stepped forward with a lit taper, the preserved end of last year's log glowing at its tip. "For the house," he said, touching the flame to kindling. "For the family. For the light that outlasts the darkness." The fire caught. Flames licked up through the kindling, reaching for the great log, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. The guests applauded softly, and somewhere a clock began to chime. Midnight, Christmas Day. Thea stood near the back of the crowd, watching the firelight play across Daniel's features. He looked different here, in this ancient hall, performing rituals his family had performed for centuries. Less like the Frost Duke, and more like what he was, the last guardian of a legacy, carrying it forward because someone had to. The clock finished its 12 chimes. The fire crackled and roared. And then, quite suddenly, the great hall plunged into darkness. Not complete darkness. The Yule log still blazed in its hearth. But the hundreds of candles that had illuminated the room, the chandeliers overhead, the sconces along the walls, all of them guttered and died at once, as if snuffed by an invisible hand. Someone screamed. Someone else laughed nervously. And then a voice cut through the chaos, the Dowager's sharp and commanding. "No one panic. It's simply a draft from the chimney fire earlier. It must have created a cross-current. Footman, relight the candles. Everyone stay where you are." But Thea barely heard her, because in the moment of darkness, in the chaos of the sudden blackout, someone had taken her hand. Without looking, she knew who it was. She knew by the size of the hand, by the warmth of it, by the way her heart stuttered in her chest. "Happy Christmas," Daniel murmured, somewhere very close to her ear. And then the candles flared back to life, and his hand was gone, and he was 3 feet away, looking for all the world as if he had never moved at all. Thea slept badly. This was not, strictly speaking, the fault of her accommodations. The room Aunt Agatha's maid had prepared for her was lovely. A corner chamber with windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens. A fire kept burning through the night. A bed so soft she felt she might drown in it. No, the problem was not the room. The problem was the memory of a hand clasping hers in the darkness. The problem was a voice murmuring, "Happy Christmas," against her ear. The problem was the way her heart had raced and continued racing for hours afterward, making sleep impossible. She was being ridiculous. She knew she was being ridiculous. Daniel Stirling was the Duke of Claremont, one of the wealthiest, most eligible men in England. She was a companion with no fortune and no prospects. Whatever had happened between them, it was a Christmas Eve fancy, nothing more. A moment of connection that would evaporate in the cold light of morning. And yet, she rose early, dressed in her plain grey woolen walking outfit, and crept downstairs in search of tea. The house was quiet, most guests still abed after the late night, but she found a footman who directed her to a small breakfast parlour where an informal spread had been laid out. She was not the first person there. Daniel stood by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand, staring out at the snow-blanketed world beyond. He was dressed simply, no cravat, no coat, just shirt sleeves and waistcoat, and he looked younger somehow, less armoured. He turned at her entrance, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Good morning," Thea said finally. He set down his coffee cup. "Good morning. I trust you slept well." "Tolerably. A lie, but a polite one. And you?" "Not particularly." His honesty surprised her. She had expected deflection, formality, the careful distance of daylight. Instead, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "About last night," she began. "Yes?" "In the great hall, when the candles went out." "Ah," Daniel's mouth curved slightly. "That. Did you—" She stopped, started again. Was that what, Miss Bromley? He asked. Back to Miss Bromley. She felt the distance in it, the retreat to formality, and she felt a wave of embarrassment. Nothing, she said quickly. I apologize. I'm not quite awake yet. She moved toward the sideboard, toward the tea things, desperate for something to do with her hands. But before she could reach them, Daniel's voice stopped her. It was deliberate. She turned. I'm sorry? In the great hall, taking your hand. It was deliberate. He met her eyes steadily. I've been trying to decide all night whether to apologize for it. I've concluded that I'm not going to. You're not? No. It was forward. It was improper. It was almost certainly a mistake. He paused. But I'm not sorry I did it. Thea's heart was doing something inadvisable. Why not? Because for approximately 3 seconds you held my hand back. The corner of his mouth lifted, and it was the best 3 seconds of my evening. The door to the breakfast parlour swung open with considerable force, admitting a woman of perhaps 45 years, dressed in an elaborate morning gown of puce silk that clashed magnificently with her reddened complexion. Behind her trailed a younger woman, a girl, really, no more than 18, with blonde ringlets and an expression of profound boredom. Your Grace. The older woman's voice could have cut glass. How delightful to find you here. I was just saying to my Cordelia that we simply must find the Duke and wish him a happy Christmas, and here you are. Daniel's expression underwent a rapid and remarkable transformation. The warmth that had been building in his eyes vanished, replaced by the familiar marble mask. He inclined his head with perfect, frigid politeness. Mrs. Hartley, Miss Hartley. Happy Christmas. Happy Christmas, Your Grace, the younger woman parroted, dropping into a curtsy so deep it bordered on genuflection. Her mother beamed as if she had performed a miracle. We were so distressed to hear about the snow, Mrs. Hartley continued, sweeping into the room with the inexorability of a siege engine. Weren't we, Cordelia? Simply devastated to think of imposing on your hospitality for so long. But then I said to Cordelia, my dear, we must make the best of it. The Duke is renowned for his generosity, and I'm certain he won't mind a few extra days of our company. Isn't that right, Your Grace? Quite, Daniel said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. Mrs. Hartley had not yet acknowledged Thea's existence. This was, Thea suspected, entirely deliberate. She busied herself with the tea things, content to be invisible. Cordelia was just saying how much she admired the Yule log ceremony, Mrs. Hartley pressed on. Such a touching tradition. She's always had a great appreciation for tradition, my Cordelia. Haven't you, dear? Yes, Mama. And such a sense of history. She was only saying last week how much she'd love to see Claremont Hall's famous portrait gallery. The ancestral portraits, the family history. She finds it fascinating. Does she? Daniel said flatly. Oh, yes. Perhaps you might show her yourself, Your Grace. I'm sure a personal tour would be so much more edifying than simply wandering about on one's own. The suggestion hung in the air like a bad smell. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm afraid I have duties to attend to this morning, he said. But I'm sure one of the footmen would be happy to assist Miss Hartley. Mrs. Hartley's smile flickered but held. How disappointing. But of course, your duties must come first. Perhaps later then. Cordelia would so enjoy... If you'll excuse me. Daniel set down his coffee cup with a decisive click. Mrs. Hartley, Miss Hartley. His gaze moved to Thea, and she swore it bordered on apologetic. Miss Bromley. He was gone before Mrs. Hartley could manufacture another reason to detain him. In the silence that followed, Mrs. Hartley finally deigned to notice Thea's existence. Her eyes swept over the grey woolen dress, the lack of jewels, the general air of not belonging, and her lip curled almost imperceptibly. I don't believe we've been introduced, she said, in a tone that suggested she saw no reason to rectify this oversight. Miss Bromley, Thea said, Lady Huxley's companion. Ah, the single syllable contained multitudes. The companion. Yes. Mrs. Hartley's smile sharpened. How kind of Lady Huxley to bring you along. It must be quite overwhelming, an event like this. So far above your usual sphere. I'm managing tolerably well, Thea said. "Are you? How brave." Mrs. Hartley turned to her daughter, dismissing Thea entirely. "Come, Cordelia. We should dress properly for Christmas morning. One never knows who one might encounter in the corridors." They swept out. Cordelia cast one backwards glance at Thea. Not hostile, exactly, but assessing, as if she were trying to work out whether Thea was a threat. Thea stood alone in the breakfast parlour, her tea growing cold in her hands, and wondered what exactly she had gotten herself into. Christmas Day at Claremont Hall unfolded with the stately inevitability of a royal procession. There was church in the morning, a private chapel on the grounds, filled to capacity with family, guests, and upper servants. There was an elaborate luncheon afterward, featuring no fewer than 3 removes and a Christmas pudding that arrived flaming dramatically. There were parlour games in the afternoon, carolling in the evening, and through it all, the relentless, exhausting performance of holiday cheer. Thea observed it all from her customary position at the margins. She was becoming quite skilled at finding the corners of rooms where she could watch without being watched, at making herself small enough to escape notice. It was a companion's greatest talent, and she had honed it to a fine art. What she could not do, no matter how hard she tried, was stop watching Daniel. He moved through his duties with cold precision, polite, correct, impeccable. She watched him dispatch a hopeful mama with 3 words, and a bow so brief the woman actually stepped backward. She watched him accept a gift from an elderly cousin with a nod that conveyed gratitude and nothing else. He said all the right things. His eyes gave away nothing. The Frost Duke, indeed. But every so often, not often enough to be remarked upon, but often enough for Thea to notice, his gaze would find hers across the room. And in those moments, the mask would slip, just slightly, and she would see the man she had met in the library, the man who argued about poetry and held her hand in the darkness. It was dangerous, this silent communication. Someone would notice eventually. Someone would talk. Someone, it turned out, already had. "Miss Bromley." Thea turned to find Mrs. Hartley bearing down on her with the determination of a ship of the line. Cordelia trailed in her wake, looking faintly mutinous. "Mrs. Hartley." Thea dropped a polite curtsy. "I hope you're enjoying the festivities." "Immensely." Mrs. Hartley's smile did not reach her eyes. "I wonder if I might have a word, in private." This boded ill. But there was no graceful way to refuse, so Thea allowed herself to be steered into a small antechamber off the main drawing room. Mrs. Hartley closed the door behind them. Cordelia remained in the room, though she drifted toward the window and stared out at the snow with the air of someone who wished to be anywhere else. "I'll come directly to the point," Mrs. Hartley said. "I've noticed you've been spending a great deal of time with the Duke." "I've been a guest at his party," Thea said carefully. "Some interaction is inevitable. Don't play coy with me, Miss Bromley. I saw you dancing with him last night. I saw the way he looked at you during the Yule log ceremony. And I saw," her eyes narrowed, "I saw him take your hand in the darkness." Thea's heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm sure you're mistaken." "I am never mistaken about these things." Mrs. Hartley stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Let me be perfectly clear. The Duke of Claremont is the most eligible bachelor in England. My Cordelia has been preparing for this match since she was 15 years old. She has been trained in every accomplishment, schooled in every art, groomed for exactly this purpose. I wish her every success," Thea said. "Do you? How generous. Then perhaps you'll understand why I cannot allow some companion with ideas above her station to interfere with years of careful planning." Thea allowed the silence to stretch on before saying quietly, "Mrs. Hartley, I have no designs on the Duke." "Then you're either a fool or a liar, and I suspect you're neither." Mrs. Hartley's eyes glittered. "I'm going to give you some advice, Miss Bromley. Take it as you will. Whatever you think is happening between you and His Grace, it isn't. Men like him don't marry women like you. They amuse themselves with women like you, and then they marry women like my Cordelia, women with breeding, and the training to be a proper duchess." "Mama," Cordelia said from the window, sounding pained. "Hush, dear. Miss Bromley needs to understand how the world works." Mrs. Hartley smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "If you continue down this path, you will ruin yourself. You will lose your position, your reputation, and whatever small security you've managed to scrape together, and the Duke will marry someone appropriate and forget you ever existed." Thea should have been devastated. She should have felt the weight of Mrs. Hartley's words crushing her foolish hopes. Instead, she felt something else entirely, a cold, clarifying anger. "Thank you for your concern," she said, her voice steady. "But I believe I'll manage my own affairs. And if you'll forgive me for saying so, Mrs. Hartley, I suspect the Duke is quite capable of choosing his own wife. Without assistance from ambitious mummers who corner young women in antechambers and deliver threats disguised as advice." Mrs. Hartley's face went an alarming shade of puce. "How dare you?" "Happy Christmas," Thea said sweetly. "I do hope you enjoy the rest of the festivities." She swept out of the antechamber before Mrs. Hartley could recover her tongue. Behind her, she heard Cordelia say quite distinctly, "I told you that wouldn't work, Mama." Despite what she'd said, Thea found herself spending the rest of Christmas Day in careful retreat. The anger faded faster than she would have liked. Mrs. Hartley was cruel, yes. Scheming, certainly, but she was not wrong. She did not avoid Daniel, exactly, but she no longer lingered in the library. She found reasons to be elsewhere when the party gathered in the orangery for the Dowager's tour of the lemon trees. She smiled when their eyes met across rooms, and then she looked away. When he approached her after dinner, she was already deep in conversation with the elderly Mrs. Clarkwell about the merits of various embroidery stitches. She saw his hesitation, the slight furrow between his brows, before he moved on. Practicality had kept her safe her whole life. She would not abandon it now. The morning after Christmas, Boxing Day, technically, though at Claremont Hall this meant little more than slightly smaller portions at breakfast, Thea woke to find a note slipped under her door. The Orangery, 10 o'clock, come alone. No signature. But she recognized the handwriting from the note Daniel had sent to the Dowager during last night's charades. Sharp, decisive strokes, elegant despite their brevity. She should not go. Every sensible bone in her body told her so. Mrs. Hartley's words echoed in her memory. Men like him don't marry women like you. They amuse themselves. But the alternative was spending another day avoiding him, pretending the connection between them didn't exist. She went. The orangery was warm despite the frigid morning, filled with the scent of citrus and growing things. Daniel was waiting by the lemon tree where they had stood on Christmas Eve, though now morning light flooded through the glass walls. "You came," he said. "I shouldn't have." "No, but I'm glad you did." He gestured to a wrought-iron bench tucked among the potted palms. "Will you sit? There's something I want to show you." Curiosity won out over caution. Thea sat. Daniel remained standing for a moment, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather-bound book, worn soft with handling. He handed it to her, and Thea opened it to pages covered in handwriting, the same sharp strokes as the note, but smaller, more cramped, filling every available space, and the words, "What kingdom would I not surrender?" for the simple gift of her attention. "Poetry," she breathed. "Terrible poetry," Daniel corrected. "Truly, genuinely, objectively, terrible poetry. Please don't read it aloud. I may die of embarrassment." But Thea was already turning pages, scanning lines, catching phrases. I had forgotten that loneliness was a choice, until she reminded me that company could be a gift. "Daniel," she said softly. "I started writing after my father and brother died," he said, sinking onto the bench beside her. "I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Dukes don't grieve, apparently. They simply carry on. But I had to put it somewhere. So I wrote, badly, constantly. I have 17 of those books now, hidden in a locked drawer in my study. They're not bad," she said, although she could not say they were particularly good either. "They're awful. I have no ear for meter, my metaphors are overwrought, and I rhyme heart with a part at least twice in every volume." He managed a self-deprecating smile. "But it's the only thing that's truly mine." Thea looked down at the book in her hands, at the words written in the margins, cramped and desperate, pouring out grief and loneliness. Then, later, at the lines where the ink was fresher, words that shimmered through with hope. Why are you showing me this? Because you trusted me with your secret, and I want you to know that I trust you with mine. Daniel's voice was quiet. Because... He stopped, started again. Because Mrs. Hartley cornered you yesterday, and I know you've been avoiding me since, and I need you to understand something. Thea's breath caught. You know about that? Cordelia told me. Apparently she was so appalled by her mother's behaviour that she sought me out and apologised on behalf of the entire Hartley family. He smiled grimly. She also informed me that she has absolutely no desire to be Duchess of Claremont, finds the very idea ghastly, and has been trying to discourage her mother's scheming for years without success. Poor Cordelia, Thea said. Indeed, I've promised to make clear at the earliest opportunity that she is in no danger of receiving an offer from me. He paused. But that's not what I wanted to tell you. What did you want to tell me? Daniel reached over and closed the book in her hands, his fingers brushing hers. Whatever Mrs. Hartley said to you, whatever poison she poured in your ear about the impossibility of... He broke off. She's wrong. I need you to know that. She's wrong about all of it. Daniel, I'm not amusing myself with you. His voice was fierce now. I'm not toying with a companion to pass the time until I marry some acceptable heiress. My intentions are sincere. I need you to believe that. Thea's eyes were burning. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. I'm still nobody, she said. You're the lady of practical wisdom. You're the woman who told me I was a garden statue to my face. You're the only person who's made me feel alive in years. Daniel's hand tightened on hers. If that's nobody, then the word has lost all meaning. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by improbable green, by warmth against winter, by the scent of lemons and the rustle of tropical leaves. I'm terrified, Thea admitted finally. I'm not asking you for answers, he said. I'm not asking you for promises. I'm just asking you to stop running away. To let whatever this is unfold naturally, without, he gestured vaguely. Without either of us letting fear make the choice for us. Thea looked at him and saw a man who wrote terrible poetry and hid from his own parties. She saw the man he must have been 5 years ago, before he'd been thrust into a position he had never wanted nor cared for. All right, she said. All right? I'll stop running, she managed a small smile. But I reserve the right to be terrified. Noted. Daniel lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The days until New Year passed in a blur of stolen moments. They were careful, more careful than Thea had ever been about anything. They did not seek each other out too obviously, nor dance more than once at any evening's entertainment. They did not even disappear together for more than a few minutes at a time. But within those constraints, they found each other constantly. In the library, arguing about books. In the portrait gallery, where Daniel told her stories about each ancestor until she was helpless with laughter. In the orangery, where they sat among the impossible greenery and talked about everything and nothing. Her childhood in the vicarage, his years at school, the dreams they'd had before life complicated them. Daniel read her advice columns aloud, adding increasingly ridiculous commentary. Thea read his poetry and tried very hard not to laugh. He pretended to be offended, but they both knew he wasn't. And through it all, Mrs. Hartley watched. She watched with narrowed eyes and pressed lips, and the air of a general planning a campaign. Cordelia trailed in her wake, looking increasingly apologetic and occasionally mouthing, "I'm sorry," at Thea, across crowded rooms. "You're falling for him," Aunt Agatha observed on the morning of December 30th. They were in Agatha's sitting room, theoretically reviewing correspondence but actually doing nothing of the sort. Thea had been staring at the same letter for 10 minutes, her thoughts drifting persistently toward dark eyes and rare smiles, and the way Daniel's hand had felt in hers. "I don't know what you mean," Thea said. "Oh, please." Agatha rolled her eyes. "You've been mooning about like a lovesick schoolgirl for days. It's quite entertaining, but also rather obvious. I have not been mooning. You sighed 6 times at breakfast," I counted. Thea's cheeks burned. The eggs were overdone. The eggs were perfect. "You were thinking about Daniel?" Agatha's eyes sparkled. "Don't bother denying it." Thea slumped back in her chair, abandoning all pretense. "Fine, yes, I have. Feelings. Are you satisfied? Immensely. And what? Thea said. And what do you intend to do about it? Thea laughed, a short, helpless sound. Do about it? What is there to do? He's a duke, Aunt Agatha. Even if this lasts beyond the snow melting, she shook her head. I don't know how to be a duchess. I don't know the first thing about running an estate, or managing staff, or navigating society at that level. I can barely manage a conversation at a dinner party without saying something I shouldn't. Ah, Agatha set down her teacup. So it's not whether he wants you, it's whether you're enough. The words landed harder than Thea expected. She looked away, blinking. I know how to economize and how to make do, she said finally, and how to be invisible when the situation requires it. None of that prepares you to be a duchess. Agatha was quiet for a long moment before saying, Theodora, look at me. Thea looked. She was surprised to find her aunt's expression entirely serious, with none of its usual theatrical mischief. I have known a great many duchesses in my time. Some of them were born to it, raised from the cradle for the role, and some of them were not. She leaned forward. Do you know what separated the great ones from the merely adequate? Breeding, training, a fortune, Thea quipped. No, Agatha's voice was firm. Heart. The great ones cared. About their families, their tenants. They paid attention. They learned. They weren't afraid to ask questions or admit when they didn't know something. She reached over and took Thea's hand. You have more heart than anyone I've ever known. You've been running my household for 3 years, and don't think I haven't noticed. You remember every servant's name. You know which tenants are struggling and which ones need a firm hand. You manage my accounts better than any steward I've ever employed. That's different. It's not different. It's exactly the same, only larger. Agatha squeezed her hand. You will learn the rest. The 1,000 little rules that govern aristocratic life, those can be taught. But the things that matter, the kindness, the intelligence, she smiled, those you already have in abundance. Thea's throat was tight. Do you truly believe that? I know it. Agatha released her hand and sat back, her face softening into its usual amused, slightly wicked expression. Besides, you'll have the dowager to help you. God knows she's been waiting decades for a granddaughter-in-law she can properly terrorize. Thea laughed despite herself. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. Agatha paused, her expression turning warm. And for what it's worth, dear girl, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. It was New Year's Eve, and the household had gathered for a midnight celebration. After dinner, the party divided as was customary. The gentlemen remained in the dining room with port and cigars, while the ladies withdrew to the drawing room for tea and conversation. Thea found herself wedged between 2 elderly matrons who wished to discuss the merits of various embroidery patterns in exhaustive detail. She was contemplating whether she could feign a headache when a maid appeared at her elbow. Miss Bromley? The girl kept her voice low. I've a note for you, miss. She pressed a folded paper into Thea's hand and disappeared before Thea could ask any questions. The note was brief. Meet me in the music room. S. Thea's heart stuttered. Daniel. Perhaps he had slipped away from the gentleman. Perhaps, like her, he was tired of stolen glances and half-finished conversations. She glanced around the drawing room. No one was watching her. The matrons had moved on to discussing the shocking decline of modern needlework. Aunt Agatha was deep in conversation with the dowager. Mrs. Hartley sat in the corner with Cordelia. Thea slipped out. The corridors were quiet, most of the servants occupied with preparations for the midnight toast. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floors as she made her way to the music room, her pulse quickening with each step. The door was slightly ajar, candlelight spilling into the hallway. She pushed it open. The man standing by the pianoforte was not Daniel. He was young, perhaps 25, with the ruddy complexion of someone who had been drinking steadily since dinner. Thea vaguely recognized him from the party, a baronet's son. He had a reputation, she recalled dimly, something about a widow in Bath. He looked up at her entrance, his expression shifting from anticipation to confusion. Oh, he said, blinking. You're not. He fumbled in his coat and produced a note. A lady wanted to meet me here, privately. Thea's stomach dropped. "Who told you that?" "One of the servants." She brought a note. The door slammed shut behind them. Thea whirled, but she already knew what she would find. The click of a key turning in the lock confirmed it. "What the devil?" The young man strode to the door and rattled the handle. "Who's locked us in?" Thea closed her eyes. She understood now with horrible, dawning clarity. The note, the locked door. A young woman of no consequence and a man with a reputation, found alone together at midnight. Mrs. Hartley. "We've been set up," she said quietly. Heat flooded her face. How could she have been so foolish? She'd been so eager to receive Daniel's note that she hadn't even paused to notice the handwriting was nothing like his elegant script. "Set up? What do you mean, set up?" The young man looked more annoyed than alarmed. "Is this some sort of game?" "Not a game. A trap." Thea pressed her hands to her temples, thinking furiously. "Someone wants us to be found here together. Compromised." He laughed, though it had a nervous edge. "Compromised? I don't even know who you are." "Miss Bromley, Lady Huxley's companion." His eyebrows rose. Why would anyone want to compromise a companion? Before she could answer, voices echoed in the corridor. A woman's voice, sharp with triumph. "Just through here, you'll see for yourselves. Mrs. Hartley, coming with witnesses." Thea's mind raced. In moments, that door would open, and she would be ruined. It wouldn't matter that nothing had happened. It wouldn't matter that she'd been tricked. Society only cared about appearances, and the appearance would be damning. An unmarried woman, alone with a known rake, behind a locked door at midnight. The footsteps drew closer. Thea braced herself. Then another set of footsteps, measured, deliberate, and a voice that stopped Mrs. Hartley mid-stride. "Mrs. Hartley." Daniel's tone was polite, distant, and utterly freezing. "You seem to have lost your way. The drawing room is in the east wing." "Your Grace," Mrs. Hartley's voice pitched higher. I saw, that is, a young lady and gentleman slipped away together, and I thought someone ought to—" "Into this room?" Daniel sounded faintly bored. "I think not. I assure you, Your Grace, I saw them with my own eyes. This was my mother's music room, Mrs. Hartley. It is always locked during revelries. No one enters without my permission." A pause, delicate as a knife's edge. "Unless you mean to suggest that someone has stolen the Duke of Claremont's keys." Silence. Through the door, Thea heard Mrs. Hartley's breath catch. When she spoke again, her voice had gone thin. Perhaps I was mistaken about which room." "I expect you were. The corridors can be disorienting for those unfamiliar with the house." Daniel's voice carried no accusation, only the distant courtesy of a man addressing someone far beneath his notice. "You look pale, Mrs. Hartley. The evening's excitement must have overtaxed you." "I'm perfectly well." "You should rest. I will have a maid bring tea to your room." It was not a suggestion. "Your Grace, the witnesses. I brought them because you were concerned about a situation that does not exist, in a room that has been locked all night." Daniel's tone remained perfectly neutral. "I'm certain Lord and Lady Beckett would prefer to return to the celebration rather than stand about in dark corridors investigating your mistake." Thea heard the elderly couple murmur their agreement, clearly eager to escape whatever this was. "The midnight toast is about to begin," Daniel continued. "I recommend the champagne. It's a particularly fine vintage." Footsteps retreating. The witnesses, gratefully fleeing. A long silence. When Daniel spoke again, his voice had dropped, meant only for Mrs. Hartley. Thea pressed closer to the door to hear. "Your daughter is a credit to you, Mrs. Hartley. It would be a shame if her prospects were damaged by unfortunate associations." Mrs. Hartley's reply was barely audible. "I understand, Your Grace. I thought you might. Good night, Mrs. Hartley." Footsteps, hurried, uneven, retreating down the corridor. Then silence. A key turned in the lock. The door swung open. Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. But when his eyes found Thea's, something shifted beneath the icy exterior. Relief, carefully contained. "Ah," Daniel said, his voice incongruously light. "Miss Bromley, there you are. I see you received my note about the sheet music. Thea blinked. The sheet music? For the bark piece we discussed. I left it in here earlier and asked one of the maids to fetch you. I thought you might want to look at it before the celebrations began. He turned to the young man, who was standing frozen by the pianoforte. Ashworth, I see you got turned around. The card room is 2 doors down. The young man seized the excuse like a drowning man grabbing a rope. Yes, right, card room. Must have the wrong door. Frightfully sorry. He fled. Daniel offered Thea his arm, as casually as if they were meeting for a morning stroll. Shall we return to the celebration? I believe the clock is about to strike midnight. As they stepped into the corridor, Thea saw Cordelia waiting a few paces away, her face pale with distress. Miss Bromley. She twisted her hands together. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what my mother was planning until I overheard her speaking to a maid. I went to find the Duke as soon as I realized. You did the right thing, Thea said. Thank you, Miss Hartley. Cordelia's eyes were bright. I'm so ashamed. What she tried to do is not your fault. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. You showed integrity tonight, Miss Hartley. That will be remembered. Cordelia gave a small, grateful nod. I should go check on her. Happy New Year, Miss Bromley. Your Grace. She hurried away. Thea and Daniel walked in silence until they reached a quiet alcove, out of sight of the main corridors. Only then did Daniel stop, turning to face her. Are you all right? I am now. Thea studied his face, still composed, still controlled, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. You were magnificent, she said. I've never seen anyone be so terrifying while saying absolutely nothing improper. I've had practice. The Frost Duke, Thea said. He has his uses. Thea felt his forearm tighten. I would have ruined her, you know. If she'd succeeded, I would have made certain she never set foot in a respectable drawing room again. They stood in silence for a moment. Through the walls, the sounds of the party drifted toward them. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the orchestra tuning for the midnight waltz. Thank you, Thea said, for coming when you did. You can thank Cordelia for that. I had no idea until she found me. Yes, but you're the one who... She shook her head. I don't know what I would have done. You would have managed. You're remarkably resourceful when cornered. His voice was light, but his eyes were serious. Though I'd prefer you didn't have to be. So would I. Thea laughed softly. She glanced toward the distant sounds of celebration. We should go back. They'll be looking for us. Probably. Neither of them moved. In the distance, the clock began to chime. Midnight. A new year. Happy New Year, Thea whispered. Daniel lifted her hand to his lips. Happy New Year. The first days of January passed in a strange, suspended state. The snow had stopped falling, but the drifts remained deep enough to make travel inadvisable. Guests who had planned to leave found themselves extending their stays. The household settled into a rhythm of enforced intimacy. Mrs. Hartley, mercifully, had retreated into sullen silence. Her scheme's failure seemed to have taken the wind from her sails, and she spent most of her time in her rooms, emerging only for meals, and even then speaking to no one but Cordelia. Thea tried not to feel too triumphant about this. She mostly failed. More importantly, something had shifted between her and Daniel since New Year's Eve. The careful distance they had maintained was gone, replaced by something more open. They still did not flaunt their connection, but neither did they hide it. They walked together in the portrait gallery. They sat together at meals. They danced together at the small evening entertainments that the Dowager continued to organize. And they talked, endlessly. In the orangery, surrounded by impossible green. In the library, arguing about books until the fire burned low. In quiet corners and crowded rooms, and once, memorably, in the kitchens at 2 a.m. when neither of them could sleep. Tell me about your father, Daniel said that night, as they sat at the great wooden table with cups of warm milk and the comfortable silence of a sleeping house around them. So, Thea told him, about the vicarage that always smelled of old books, about Greek lessons and theological debates, and a man who believed absolutely in the power of kindness. about watching him waste away, unable to stop it or do anything but hold his hand at the end. "He would have liked you," she said finally. "Would he?" He liked people who thought for themselves, people who didn't just accept the world as it was presented to them. She smiled sadly. "He was always disappointed that I didn't become a radical. He had such hopes for my revolutionary potential. You write an advice column that tells women to trust their own judgment over society's expectations. That seems fairly revolutionary to me. It's not the same as storming barricades." "Perhaps not, but it might be more effective in the long run." Daniel reached across the table to take her hand. "Revolutions come and go, but changing how people think, what they believe is possible, that lasts." They sat in silence for a moment, hands intertwined across the worn kitchen table. "My father wrote poetry too," Daniel said. "Did I tell you that?" "No," Thea replied. "He never showed anyone except my mother. After she died, he burned it all. Couldn't bear to look at it, I think. The memories were too painful." He paused. "I found one page that survived. It had fallen behind his desk. I've kept it all these years." "What does it say?" Daniel's mouth curved. "Love is not the lightning, swift and sudden bright. Love is small moments, quiet and accumulating." Thea's throat tightened. "That's beautiful. He was better at it than I am." Daniel's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I'm beginning to understand what he meant, though. About the small moments." Thea's breath hitched. She opened her mouth to speak, but he got there first. "You don't have to say anything." His voice was gentle. "I know it's complicated. He stopped. "I just wanted you to know." "I know," she said softly. "I know it too." January 5th dawned bright and clear, the first truly sunny day since the storm began. From her window, Thea could see servants already working to clear the main drive. By tomorrow, the roads would be passable. By tomorrow, the guests would begin to leave. By tomorrow, this extraordinary fortnight would be nothing but a memory. She dressed with more care than usual, choosing a morning gown of deep green that Aunt Agatha had pressed upon her. "It brings out your eyes, dear, and you'll need every advantage today." She didn't ask what her aunt meant by that. She suspected she already knew. The household was buzzing with 12th night preparations. There would be a feast tonight, the grandest of the season, a masquerade, as was traditional, the cutting of the 12th night cake, and the crowning of the king and queen of Misrule. And finally, at midnight, the ceremonial extinguishing of the Yule log that had burned since Christmas Eve. The end of the holidays, the end of the magic. Thea found Daniel in the library. He was standing by the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds, and he didn't turn when she entered. "The roads are clearing," he said. "I know," Thea murmured. "The guests will be leaving. Your aunt will want to return to London." He turned then, and there was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, a raw vulnerability, a fear he wasn't bothering to hide. "Stay," he said. "Pardon?" "I know I'm asking the impossible. Why, this makes no sense." He broke off, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "But I'm asking anyway. Stay. Not as a guest. Not as your aunt's companion. Stay as what?" The question hung between them. Daniel took a breath. "I had a speech prepared," he said. "I've been working on it for days. All the right words and the proper arguments. Why I don't care about fortune or connections, or any of the things I'm supposed to care about. And I've forgotten every word of it." He laughed, a little desperately. "You do that to me." He crossed the room to stand before her, close enough to touch, though he didn't. "I love you," he said. "I know it's too soon, but I've spent 5 years being careful and proper and appropriate, and I'm so tired of it." He reached up slowly and cupped her face in his hands. "Thea, will you marry me? Stay here. Let me court you properly. Let me prove to you that this isn't merely a holiday fancy. Give me the chance to do this right." Thea's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "But society." "Society can go hang." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheekbones. "I'm a duke. I can marry who I choose. And I choose you, Thea. She knew she should say no. There were 1,000 reasons, the kind of practical reasons she had built her entire life around. But looking into Daniel's eyes, seeing the hope there, the fear, the desperate wanting, she found she couldn't remember a single one of them. Yes, she said. Daniel blinked. Yes? Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you. She was laughing now, or crying, she couldn't tell which. Yes to all of it. I'm tired of being sensible too. And then he was kissing her. Not the kiss of a duke claiming his prize, but something softer, sweeter, a question and an answer all at once. Thea kissed him back, and the library dissolved around them. There was nothing in the world but this moment, this man, and this terrifying, wonderful, impossible thing they had somehow found together. When they finally broke apart, Daniel was smiling, that real smile she had worked so hard to earn. The Dowager is going to be insufferable, he said. So is Aunt Agatha. He kissed her again, soft and quick. Tonight, at the masquerade, let me announce it properly. A public declaration? Thea said, surprised. A public commitment. I want everyone to know. He paused. I want the world to see what I see when I look at you. And what do you see? Everything, Daniel said simply. I see everything. The hours between morning and evening had never passed so slowly. Thea drifted through the day in a daze, barely registering the flurry of activity around her. Servants rushed past with armfuls of greenery and crates of candles. The kitchens sent up tantalizing smells of roasting meats and sugared fruits. Somewhere in the depths of the house, musicians were tuning their instruments for the evening's festivities. And through it all, Thea could think of nothing but Daniel's face when she had said yes, the wonder in his eyes. She was sitting in her room, staring at nothing in particular, when Aunt Agatha swept in without knocking. There you are. Agatha's eyes were bright with barely contained excitement. The Dowager and I require your presence, immediately. My presence? For what? Questions later. Come now. She was whisked through corridors she barely recognized, up a staircase she had never climbed, until they arrived at a set of double doors that could only lead to the Dowager's private apartments. Agatha knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. The Dowager Duchess's sitting room was smaller than Thea had expected, intimate, with comfortable chairs arranged around a crackling fire and windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The Dowager herself sat in the largest chair, dressed in her customary black silk, but there was nothing funereal about her expression. She looked, Thea thought, like a cat who had gotten into the cream. Ah, the Dowager said. The future Duchess of Claremont. Do sit down, child. We have much to discuss. Thea's legs gave out. She sat. How did you... My grandson visited me an hour ago. The Dowager's smile was triumphant. He informed me of his intentions and asked for my blessing. I gave it, naturally. I've been waiting 5 years for that boy to show some sense. You're not surprised? Surprised? The Dowager exchanged a glance with Agatha, who had settled into the chair beside her with the air of a satisfied observer. My dear girl, Agatha and I have been hoping for precisely this outcome since we first saw you together. Thea felt heat rise to her cheeks. I don't understand. There must be dozens of more suitable matches. Suitable. The Dowager spoke the word like a curse. I have watched my grandson receive proposals from suitable young women for years. Not one of them saw him, truly saw him. They saw the title, the fortune, the consequence. They would have married Claremont and never once wondered about Daniel. Do you know that boy hasn't laughed since losing his father and brother? Agatha said. Not properly. Until you. We would have accepted far less illustrious qualifications, the Dowager added. A woman who can make Daniel laugh is worth more than all the dowries in England. Thea's eyes were burning. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of these magnificent, terrifying, wonderful women. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank us yet. The Dowager's voice turned brisk. We have practical matters to discuss. Daniel informs me he intends to make a public declaration this evening at the masquerade. This is all very romantic, but romance without preparation is merely chaos. Preparation? Thea echoed. The announcement must be handled correctly. The timing, the setting, the witnesses, everything must be arranged to maximize impact and minimize gossip. The dowager began ticking points off on her fingers. We need the right people present when the announcement is made, and we need you dressed appropriately. I could wear Aunt Agatha's, Thea began. You cannot accept a duke's proposal in borrowed morning wear. Fortunately, I anticipated this eventuality. The dowager nodded to Agatha, who rose and crossed to a wardrobe in the corner of the room. Agatha, if you please. Agatha opened the wardrobe and withdrew a gown. Thea stopped breathing. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Silver, silk, shot through with threads of gold that caught the firelight like captured stars. The bodice was embroidered with tiny seed pearls. The skirt fell in elegant folds that whispered of wealth and taste, and everything Thea had never possessed. It was mine, the dowager said softly. 60 years ago, when I was young and foolish and desperately in love with a man my family thought beneath me. I wore it to the ball where we announced our engagement. She paused. I've been saving it for Daniel's bride ever since. Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. You can, and you will. The dowager's voice brooked no argument. Consider it a wedding gift, if you prefer. Or a bribe, to ensure you don't change your mind before the ceremony. I'm not going to change my mind. No, the dowager smiled, a real smile, warm and approving. I don't believe you are. Agatha laid the gown across a nearby chair and returned to her seat, looking insufferably pleased with herself. Now, the dowager continued, let us discuss the evening's choreography. Agatha will ensure you enter the ballroom at precisely the right moment. Daniel will find you near the terrace doors. We've arranged for a small ensemble to be playing there, something suitable for a dramatic moment. The announcement will come just before the cake is cut, when all eyes are already on the dais. You've thought of everything. I've been planning this for 5 years, child. I have thought of everything. The ballroom at Claremont Hall had been transformed, gone were the Christmas decorations of evergreen and holly. In their place, hundreds of candles blazed from every surface. Silver ribbons hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. At the center of the room, the 12th night cake rose in magnificent tiers, decorated with sugar crowns and gilded leaves, waiting for the moment when it would be cut and the king and queen of misrule crowned. And everywhere, masks, brought down from the attics, trunks of Venetian masterpieces and jeweled dominoes that hadn't seen light in years. The guests had embraced them with enthusiasm that bordered on fervor. There were dominoes of every color, half masks studded with jewels, elaborate Venetian creations, trailing feathers and ribbons. Ladies in silks and satins, gentlemen in their finest evening clothes, all rendered anonymous behind their disguises. Thea paused at the entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs. The silver gown fit as if it had been made for her. Agatha had dressed her hair with pearl-tipped pins and lent her a delicate mask of white feathers that left her mouth and chin exposed. She looked, when she had glimpsed herself in the mirror, like someone from a fairy tale, like someone who belonged in a room like this. She didn't feel like she belonged. She felt like an imposter who would be discovered at any moment, unmasked in more ways than one. Stop fidgeting, Agatha murmured from beside her. You look magnificent, and you know it. I look terrified. That's invisible behind the mask. Now smile, dear. You're about to become the most envied woman in England. They descended into the ballroom. The whispers started immediately, soft, curious, following in her wake like ripples in a pond. Who is she? Where did she come from? Thea kept her chin high and her smile fixed, letting Agatha guide her through the crowd with the ease of long practice. She spotted Daniel almost at once. He stood near the terrace doors, as the dowager had promised, dressed in black evening clothes that made him look every inch the Duke. His mask was simple, a black domino that covered his eyes but left the strong line of his jaw visible. He was speaking with an elderly gentleman, nodding politely, but his gaze was scanning the room with barely concealed impatience. Then his eyes found hers. Even across the crowded ballroom, even through masks and candlelight, and the swirl of dancers between them, Thea felt the impact of that look. It was as if everyone else had ceased to exist, as if the music had faded, the the chatter silenced, the whole glittering assembly reduced to nothing but backdrop. Daniel excused himself from his conversation. He began to move toward her. "Perfect timing," Agatha breathed and released Thea's arm. "I'll be with the Dowager." Then she was gone, melting into the crowd. Thea stood alone and watched Daniel approach. He stopped before her. His eyes, dark behind the mask, travelled over the silver gown, the pearl-studded hair, the white feathers framing her face. "You're beautiful," he said quietly. "Your grandmother's doing. She's been saving this dress for 60 years, apparently." "Not the dress," Daniel's mouth curved, "though I admit it doesn't hurt." The orchestra struck up a waltz, a slow, sweeping melody that seemed to wrap around them like an embrace. Daniel offered his hand. "Dance with me?" Thea took it. They moved together through the crowd, finding their place among the other couples, falling into the rhythm of the music as if they had been dancing together for years. Daniel's hand was warm at her waist. His eyes never left her face. "I've been thinking about what I want to say," he murmured, "when I make the announcement. Have you prepared a speech?" "Only 7 different versions. I've discarded all of them." He guided her through a turn, drawing her closer than the dance strictly required. "How do you condense something like this into words? Explain it to a room full of strangers." "You could try. I'm marrying Miss Bromley because she's magnificent and I'm lucky she'll have me." "Too brief. Miss Bromley has agreed to make me the happiest of men, provided I never again express a preference for Byron over Wordsworth." "Too flippant. I love her and I can't imagine my life without her." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "That one," he said softly. "That's the one." The waltz carried them past the terrace doors, past the musicians in their corner, past the elaborate 12th night cake waiting to be cut. Thea caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd. The Dowager, watching from her chair with an expression of satisfaction. Agatha, standing beside her, dabbing suspiciously at her eyes. Cordelia Hartley, offering a shy smile of congratulation. Mrs. Hartley, notable mainly for her conspicuous absence. "Where is Mrs. Hartley?" Thea asked. "Developing a sudden headache in her rooms," according to Cordelia. Daniel's smile was wry. "I may have implied that her presence at tonight's festivities would be unwelcome." "You are terrifying." "Only when I want to be." He spun her through another turn. "You don't seem to be that affected by it, though." "I don't suppose I am." The music was building toward its crescendo. Around them, the ballroom glittered and swirled. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked. Thea's heart was pounding. Her palms were sweating beneath her gloves. Every sensible instinct screamed that this was madness, that she should run, hide, retreat to the safety of invisibility. She ignored them all. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Daniel's hand tightened on hers as he guided her into position. The waltz spun on for another moment, the world a blur of candlelight and silk. Then the music stopped. A hush fell over the ballroom as the master of ceremonies, an elderly man with an impressive set of whiskers and a voice that could have commanded armies, stepped onto the small dais that had been erected near the 12th night cake. "Lords and ladies," he announced, "honoured guests. The hour approaches when we shall cut the 12th night cake and crown our King and Queen of Misrule. But first, His Grace, the Duke of Claremont, has requested a moment to address the company." Another ripple of whispers. Thea felt the weight of every eye in the room, felt the speculation and curiosity pressing against her like a physical force. Daniel squeezed her hand once, then released it and stepped forward. He mounted the dais with the easy grace of a man born to command attention. In his black evening clothes, his dark mask, he looked every inch the Frost Duke, powerful, untouchable, remote. Then he began to speak, and the illusion shattered. 12 days ago, Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, a woman wandered into my library and informed me that I had all the warmth of a garden statue in January. A startled laugh from somewhere in the crowd. Thea felt heat rise to her cheeks. She did not know she was speaking to the Duke of Claremont. She thought me some poor relation, hiding from the festivities. His mouth curved slightly. She was not entirely wrong. I had been hiding for 5 years, from this house, from this season, from any feeling that might prove inconvenient. I had made coldness into a virtue and called it duty. He descended from the dais, crossing the distance between them with measured steps. The crowd parted before him like water, creating a path that led directly to where Thea stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. Daniel stopped before her, removed his mask. The face beneath was open in a way she had never seen it in company, stripped of every careful defense. "Miss Bromley," he said, his voice carrying through the silent ballroom, "you told me the truth when no one else would. You argued with me, laughed at me, and refused to be impressed by anything but the substance of my character, which you found wanting, and said so." He took her hand, raising it so the assembly could see. "I have spent 12 days trying to become a man worthy of your good opinion. This morning, I asked Miss Bromley to be my wife." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "She has done me the extraordinary honor of accepting." The collective gasp from the crowd seemed to make the chandeliers tremble. Daniel turned to address the crowd, still holding Thea's hand. "I present to you my betrothed, the future Duchess of Claremont." For a moment, the ballroom held its breath. Then Thea, her heart pounding but her training holding firm, swept into a deep, formal curtsy. When she rose, Daniel was looking at her with such open adoration that she forgot, for a moment, that a crowd was watching. He raised her hand to his lips, a gesture formal enough to be proper, intimate enough to make his feelings clear. The ballroom erupted. Applause, cheers, shocked gasps, delighted laughter, a cacophony of reactions that blended together into a roar of sound. "Well," he said quietly, for her ears alone, "that's done it. No escaping now." "I wasn't trying to escape," she murmured back. "Good, because I'm not letting you go." And then, because he had spent 5 years being careful, and he was done with careful, he pulled her close and kissed her. Right there, in the middle of the ballroom, in full view of the glittering assembly. The applause doubled. The Dowager Duchess was crying. This was, Thea suspected, a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. The woman who had terrorized society for 50 years, who had outlived 3 kings and 2 husbands and never shown a moment of weakness, was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief and making no effort to hide it. "Well," she said, when Thea and Daniel approached arm in arm, "I suppose you think you've made me happy." "I hope so," Daniel said. Insufferable boy. But she was smiling through her tears. "Come here." Daniel bent to receive her embrace. A proper embrace, not the stiff formality Thea had expected. The Dowager clung to him for a long moment, whispering something in his ear that made his expression soften. Then she released him and turned to Thea. "Miss Bromley, my future granddaughter." The Dowager's eyes were sharp despite their moisture. "I expect you to keep him in line." "I'll do my best, Your Grace." "None of this, Your Grace nonsense. You'll call me grandmother, as Daniel does." She paused. "Or Your Terrifying Magnificence, if you prefer. I answer to both." Thea laughed, surprising herself. "Grandmother it is, then." "Good." The Dowager reached out and took Thea's hand, pressing it firmly. "Welcome to the family, child. God help you." "Speaking of family," Aunt Agatha interjected, materializing at Thea's elbow with uncanny timing, "I believe there's a small matter of a wager to be settled." The wager. The Dowager's tears vanished, replaced by a gleam of competitive fire. "You owe me £10, Agatha." "I owe you nothing of the sort," Agatha said, sounding indignant. "My terms were that he would propose by 12th night." The Dowager leaned forward. "Precisely. 12th night is tomorrow, which means my original prediction stands." "Nonsense! 12th night celebrations begin on the evening of the 5th. Everyone knows that." "The evening of the 5th is not the day of the 6th. The proposal occurred tonight. Therefore, it occurred before 12th night." Agatha sighed. "You're simply a poor loser." "I am an excellent loser. I simply never have occasion to practice." Thea watched this exchange with growing amusement. Daniel, beside her, was doing a poor job of hiding his smile. "Have they always been like this?" she asked him quietly. "For as long as I can remember. They've been arguing over everything from card games to flower arrangements since before I was born. He paused. I believe their longest-running dispute involves a recipe for syllabub that both claim originated with their respective grandmothers. How long has that been going on? 43 years. Good Lord. Welcome to the family, Daniel echoed his grandmother's words. God help you indeed. The argument had progressed to the point where both women were consulting imaginary legal authorities to support their positions. Finally, the dowager threw up her hands. Fine, she declared. We shall call it a draw. No money changes hands. Acceptable, Agatha agreed, though I maintain that I was technically correct. You were technically insufferable. There's a difference. Strong words from someone who spent 5 years failing to find her grandson a suitable match. I wasn't failing. I was waiting for exactly the right person. The dowager's gaze softened as it landed on Thea. And now she's here. A brief silence fell, warm, weighted with emotion that none of them quite knew how to express. Then Agatha cleared her throat. Well, she said briskly, I suppose I'll need a new companion. Oh, Aunt Agatha, don't look at me like that, child. I'm not distressed. I'm delighted. Agatha's eyes were suspiciously bright. I only took you in because you needed rescuing. Now you don't need rescuing anymore. I'll still visit. Every week if you'll have me, Thea assured her. You'll be a duchess. You'll be far too busy for weekly visits. I will never be too busy for you. Thea took her aunt's hands. You saved me, Aunt Agatha. When I had nothing and no one, you gave me a home. I won't forget that. Agatha blinked rapidly. Yes, well, sentiment is all very fine, but we should probably return to the party. You have a 12th night cake to help cut, and I believe the Master of Ceremonies is looking for the newly betrothed couple. Indeed, the elderly gentleman with the impressive whiskers was hovering nearby, clearly torn between duty and discretion. Daniel caught his eye and nodded. One moment, he said to Thea. The King and Queen of Misrule must be crowned. The King and what? Thea's eyes widened. Surely they don't expect us to... It's tradition. The newly engaged couple presides over the 12th night revels. Daniel's smile was wicked. Didn't I mention? You absolutely did not. Must have slipped my mind. Thea opened her mouth to protest, but he was already leading her toward the dais, and the crowd was already parting, and the Master of Ceremonies was already announcing them to a fresh round of applause. Thea found herself standing beside the magnificent 12th night cake, a gilded crown being settled onto her hair, while Daniel received one of his own with considerably more grace. Lords and ladies, the Master of Ceremonies boomed, I present to you the King and Queen of Misrule. May their reign be merry and their revels bright. The crowd cheered. The orchestra struck up a lively tune. Someone pressed a knife into Thea's hand. She was apparently expected to cut the cake, and before she could protest, Daniel's hand was covering hers, guiding the blade through layers of fruit and spice and sugar. This is madness, she whispered. This is tradition. Is there a difference? Not at Claremont Hall, Daniel grinned. Besides, you're going to have to get used to being the centre of attention. Duchesses don't get to hide in corners. Perhaps I'll start a new tradition. The Invisible Duchess. I'm afraid it's too late for that. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. Everyone's already seen you. Everyone already knows. You're stuck with me now, Thea Bromley, for better or worse. Thea looked out at the glittering ballroom, at the masked faces, the swirling dancers, the candlelight and silver ribbons, and impossible abundance of it all. At the dowager, watching from her chair with an expression of fierce pride. At Aunt Agatha, dabbing at her eyes while pretending not to cry. At Daniel, standing beside her with a crown on his head and love in his eyes. For better, she said firmly. Definitely for better. The revels continued until the hour grew late. There was dancing and drinking, and the ceremonial distribution of 12th night cake. There was music and laughter and joy of the sort that Claremont Hall had not seen in years. Daniel danced with his grandmother, who complained the entire time about his posture while beaming with undisguised happiness. Thea danced with every elderly gentleman who approached her, charming them so thoroughly that 3 of them promised to call on her aunt immediately upon returning to London. And through it all, Daniel kept finding his way back to her side. A brush of hands across a crowded room, a shared glance over someone else's shoulder, a stolen moment on the terrace, where the cold air bit at their cheeks, and he kissed her until she forgot her own name. At midnight, the dowager rose from her chair and clapped her hands for attention. The orchestra fell silent, the dancers stilled. Lords and ladies alike turned toward her with the respect due a woman who had shaped society for half a century. "The hour approaches," she announced, "when we must bid farewell to the Christmas season. The Yule log that has burned since Christmas Eve must now be extinguished, a piece preserved to kindle next year's flame. It is time to gather in the great hall for the final ceremony." The guests began to move, a colourful procession flowing from the ballroom through the corridors toward the medieval heart of the house. Thea found herself swept along, Daniel's hand warm in hers, until they emerged into the great hall with its soaring stone walls and hammer-beam ceiling. The Yule log burned low in the enormous hearth, what had once been a massive oak trunk, now reduced to glowing embers and charred remains. The heat from it was fierce, even from a distance, and shadows danced across the ancient stones. "It's beautiful," Thea breathed. "My mother's favourite tradition," Daniel said quietly. "She used to say that the Yule log was a promise. As long as we kept the flame burning, we would never be alone in the darkness." The dowager stepped forward, moving with the careful dignity of age. In her hands she carried a long pair of iron tongs and a fireproof box. "The flame that burns here," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall, "has burned for over 200 years. Tonight we extinguish it, but we do not let it die. We carry it forward into the new year, a spark preserved against the darkness." She reached into the hearth with the tongs, extracting a glowing piece of wood no bigger than her hand. With practiced movements, she transferred it to the fireproof box and sealed the lid. "Next Christmas," she continued, "this ember will kindle a new flame, and so the light continues, so the warmth endures, so we remember that even in the darkest nights, hope remains." She turned to face the assembled guests, the sealed box in her hands. "This year," she said, "the flame passes to a new generation. My grandson Daniel has found his light at last, a woman worthy of the name Claremont." Her gaze found Thea in the crowd. "Miss Bromley, come forward." Thea's heart stuttered. She hadn't expected to be called out and made part of the ceremony. But Daniel was squeezing her hand, and the dowager was waiting, and all the guests were watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to approval. She stepped forward. The dowager placed the fireproof box in her hands. It was warm, not hot enough to burn, but warm enough to feel like something living. "Guard this well," the dowager said quietly. "It is more than wood and fire. It is memory. It is hope. It is the promise that this family will endure, as it has endured for 300 years. Thea's throat was tight. "I will. I know you will." The dowager's hand came up to rest briefly on her cheek, a grandmother's gesture, proprietary and fond. "Now," she said, turning back to the crowd, "let us extinguish the flame." The servants came forward with buckets of water, carefully prepared for this moment. One by one, they poured them over the remaining embers, sending hissing clouds of steam toward the vaulted ceiling. The light in the hearth dimmed, flickered, and finally died. Darkness fell over the great hall. For a moment, there was only silence. Thea clutched the warm box in her hands, feeling the ember within like a heartbeat. Then Daniel's voice rang out, clear and strong. "Light the candles." Servants sprang into action, touching tapers to the dozens of candles arranged around the hall. One by one, new flames sparked to life, small, bright, pushing back the darkness. Within moments, the great hall glowed with candlelight, softer than the Yule log's blaze, but no less warm. "Happy 12th night," Daniel said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "And Happy New Year to come." A cheer rose from the guests. The orchestra, which had followed them from the ballroom, struck up a joyful tune. And Daniel turned to Thea with a smile that made her heart catch. "The first 12th night of our lives together. he said. The first of many, I hope, she replied. He drew her close, heedless of the watching crowd. Thank you. For what? For finding my library, for telling me the truth. His forehead touched hers. For saving me. Thea thought of the ember in the box she still held, the tiny flame preserved against darkness, carried forward into an uncertain future. A promise, a hope, a light that would not die. You saved me too, she said softly. I just didn't know I needed saving until I met you. The clock began to strike midnight. 12 chimes, marking the official end of Twelfth Night and the Christmas season. Around them, guests raised glasses and called out blessings. Somewhere nearby, Aunt Agatha was definitely crying. The dowager was pretending not to smile. And in the great hall of Claremont, surrounded by 300 years of history and the promise of a future she had never imagined, Thea Bromley kissed the man she loved and felt, for the first time in her life, like she had finally come home. Dearest gentle listener, I do hope you found this slightly fantastical Christmas tale a pleasant diversion from the ordinary. Now, I must confess a small scandal. I devote such attention to crafting the story itself that my image selection is rather economical. Do tell me, are matching scenes with our characters' visages essential to your listening pleasure, or do you find yourself ignoring the screen entirely? Your counsel would prove invaluable for future episodes. I harbour grand ambitions for this channel, but as with any proper courtship, these tales cannot be rushed into existence. Your enthusiasm, expressed through that delightful thumbs up button and your thoughts in the comments, provides more encouragement than you might imagine. If you wish to be alerted when the next story arrives at your door, do subscribe to The Drawing Room